Welcome to the Modeling Lifestyle, where we celebrate how modelers have embraced their modeling and friendships as a lifestyle. We discuss how modeling can become a life passion and lead to lifelong friendships. The goal of the modeling lifestyle is to preserve the modeling and interests of leading modelers in the modeling industry. The modeling lifestyle is sponsored by NGNC, a market leader in quarter-inch scale modeling with products from over 50 vendors and the largest collection of out-of-stock model paints with over 9,000 bottles available. And now to Jim Kello, MMR and host of the Modeling Lifestyle.
I love the sound of a whistle.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We've got a wonderful show for you, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. I hope you'll come back often to see our other shows and tell your friends about them so that they can benefit from what we're trying to accomplish here. Our shows introduce modelers who are not only great hobbyists and not only great modelers, but people who have really made modeling a significant part of their lifestyles. Before we start the show and introduce our guests this evening, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for one of our team members who's in the hospital tonight with COVID and pneumonia. Phil Edholm has been a key player in the production of these shows from the onset of our series, and we all wish him the best and a speedy recovery. So if we could take a moment of silence for Phil, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much. Well, tonight we have got one super guy who truly has a modeling lifestyle, Lou Sassi. Lou Sassi is not only an excellent creative and artistic modeler, but he is a fantastic author, a great professional photographer, and a person recognized all over the United States and the world as a major promoter of model railroading and for helping others achieve their goals in modeling. Lou, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us tonight. We really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure, Jim. Thank you very much for all the accolades. Really appreciate that.
Well, they're not really accolades, they're true facts, Lou, and most people know it, but it doesn't hurt every once in a while to say it. Lou, do us a favor and tell us a little bit about your background. Who is Lou Sassi?
Well, Lou Sassi was born in Amsterdam, New York in December of 1944. And up until 14 years ago, I lived in the eastern New York area by the state capitol, by Albany. My parents moved to Saratoga Springs when I was about 4 years old, and I lived in Saratoga until my late teens. I graduated from Saratoga Springs High School in 1962 and attended the New York State Ranger School in Wanakena, New York, where I graduated in 1964. I majored in surveying at the Ranger School. And when I graduated, I started work for the New York Conservation Department for about a year or two, transferred to the General Electric Company in Schenectady as a draftsman. And met my wife in Gloversville. My parents by that time had moved to Gloversville, and I met Cheryl in Gloversville, and we got married in 1968. In 1971, we bought a home in Charlton, and we had two boys. In 71 and 73, we had Adam and Eric, our sons, and we now have 4 grandkids. After getting married, we were living in Charlton. I started work with an engineering and surveying firm. I wanted to use my background in surveying, or my schooling in surveying, so I got a job with a surveying engineering firm in Niskayuna. And unfortunately, after 12 or 14 years, I had just achieved my license. I took the test and I got a land surveying license for New York State. And just a few months after that, we had a major recession, and they laid off. They had a firm of 150 people, and I was the 50th of 50 of those people to be laid off. We were a little heavy in licensed land surveyors. They didn't need another one. So just at that time, we were very fortunate. Cheryl had started back to work part-time at GE Broadcasting. And so we both immediately started looking for full-time work. And we decided that whoever found for full-time work first would take on a job. At the same time, I tried to start my own surveying firm. And I had a very reliable crew, which consisted of my wife. So the two of us did some surveying on the side. We were surveying on the weekends, and she was working full-time at GE. She got offered a full-time job at broadcasting, so she took that. And I decided to play Mr. Mom. I stayed home with the kids. I still did some surveying. I dabbled in it, but it was just becoming too much work, weekends and all week long. So I started working on my railroad. When the kids were in school, I started writing model railroad articles on how-to projects. And I contacted the boys there, and I started doing craftsman kit reviews. And it was a really good deal, because they would send me a craftsman kit. They would send it to me for free. I would build it. They would pay me to build it, and then they'd pay me for the article. And then in the end of it all, I got to keep the kit. So while I was building my railroad, probably a half a dozen to a dozen of the buildings on my railroad ended up being craftsman kits that I built and reviewed. And I also, to make a little more money, started drawing cartoons for Model Railroader. For about 8 years, I drew various cartoons that appeared in Model Railroader every few months. And to make a little more cash, I got involved in drawing not house plans, but pen and ink drawings of houses for real estate agents who were selling and buying homes for the owners to have when they left the house or when they were moving in. They would have a drawing of the house. I would mount them in a frame, and they would present them to the owners. I made some money doing that.
Lou, what scales have you worked in?
I've started out with O scale, or well, actually O tinplate. My father managed an auto store, a national auto store in Saratoga Springs, New York. And in the winter, around Christmas time, he used to have Lionel model trains. And you can see in the photo on the screen, my very first train. That was an O gauge 060. That engine and the cars ended up being my brother and I had an older brother, and we had a small Lionel layout in the basement, and that was the train that ran on that layout. I still have it to this day. I switched to HO scale in my teens when I picked up my first MR at a newsstand by Saratoga High School in December of 1958. And the realism in the photographs in that book really amazed me. If you show the next slide, you'll see those. I never realized at the time that the photographs were by people like Cliff Grant and Jack Work. Cliff Grant was a very good friend of John Allen's, and that's where that Shay, that's the person who took that picture of that Shay and probably built it also. Jack Work's a sand house was another kit, another article in MR that I actually ended up with a model of that building on my own railroad eventually. So that got me really hooked on scale HO railroads. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, once we were married and in our own home in Charlton, we bought a house in Charlton. I began working on my own Boston to Maine West Tusick Division Railroad. It's an HO scale, it was an HO scale railroad. And my ultimate goal was to be able to photograph it and create photos like I had seen in these early MRs. So over the next 30 years, I managed to do more than one photograph. I had numerous articles in the magazine, and I got published in Model Railroader, the cover of Model Railroader a few times, and Great Model Railroads. I was dabbling in that layout until we moved south in around 2009. And when we moved south, I switched to ON30, Sandy River and Rangy Lakes, actually. I had read Linwood Moody's book on the main two footers, and that started to get me hooked.
And so really the Sandy River is really your prototype now. What what got you involved in that? I mean, an OM2 kind of situation.
Well, again, I as I mentioned, Linwood Moody, in the early 60s, after I had graduated from school, one of the first things I did when I was back at home and had some time to myself, I read Linwood Moody's the main two footers, an unbelievably good book. He was an excellent writer. He just got me hooked on the railroad. And also, Cheryl and I were married. The kids, before the kids came along, our sons, we took our first field trip was to go to the Edaville Railroad. We rode behind a bridge in Saco River Forney number 7 in the Edaville. And after doing that, I got even more excited about the main narrow gauge. I always wanted to model the Sandy River, but in the 60s and 70s, whatever, you just couldn't find shake the box kits, and you couldn't find inexpensive locomotives. You might find some brass here and there, but there really wasn't that much available, mass market available for the Sandy River ON2 or HON2 equipment. I was fortunate in 2007, I met Tony Parisi. He sent me to Tony's Train Exchange. He sent me down a Bachmann ON30 Forney that was an excellent representation of a main 2-foot locomotive. And it would run on HO gauge track. And at the same time, Bachmann was releasing ON30 equipment, which would allow me to easily replicate the 2-foot gauge equipment. And that all led to my current layout. And these are photographs of my current layout. These are all 40s and some 280s I have on there. And these are photos of that layout.
That's just outstanding. There's no question about it. Well, Lou, you know, a lot of people have heard about you and so forth, but not many people may have had an opportunity to really see some of the photos of your modeling and so forth. So let's take a minute and check out a few of them. Dylan, if we could see a couple of photos of Lou's modeling. What do we see here, Lou?
This is the strong station. This is on the winter side of the layout. You can see the hardwood trees are barren. It's actually early winter. There's some snow piles laying around to the ground here, but just along this dirt road up into the woods. We've got a train pulling out of Strong Station, and we've got Oris Voss watching the goings on from his rail car in the foreground.
And next?
This is an overall of the layout. This is as you come up the door, you're looking at the hotel. This is the Mountain View Hotel, just I would say left center of the picture. And on the right side is the Kingfield side of the layout, which is early summer. And as I said before, the Strong side of the layout is out of view on the left, and that's early fall. And that's an overall of the railroad.
And this is all ON30.
Yes, yes.
Got it.
There's an interchange with standard gauge O scale, but just a length of track, so you can utilize it during an operating session.
Understood. Well, listen, before we go and see more of your photos and everything, let's introduce a few of your friends here to join us this evening, and have them maybe introduce themselves a little bit and tell us a little bit about how they met Lou Sassi. So the first one that I'd like to introduce is John Bucknall. John, welcome. John, you're muted, I think.
Okay, glad to be here. As you can see, I'm on the Canadian going across Canada, but I'll make some time for this meeting.
We certainly do appreciate your taking that time.
No,
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you met Lou?
Sure. Well, actually, I'm in Cincinnati, and I'm a retired professional engineer and research fellow at Procter & Gamble here. That's why I ended up in Cincinnati. And I'm heavily involved since 3.5 years old in model railroading. And I do a lot here for the NMRA division, a ton, and I'm very, very active. And I do lots of other things, which you'll hear about, mainly about with Lou. But I first met Lou in '94. And Lou and Cheryl came to our house to photograph the Eastern Loggers group layout that was in my basement until last November for 42 years. and two different houses. And he came to shoot it for an article for Model Railroader, actually for Great Model Railroads. And the reason Lou found out about our layout and I found out about Lou is because Alan Keller visited here, Alan Keller of the video production fame. And he came here to scout it for a possible video shoot. And he recommended it to Lou to shoot for a still shoot. And so that's how we first got connected. And following that, we had a ton of unpublished layouts here in Cincinnati that were of publication quality. And we never had an outlet to get them published. But once I struck up a friendship with Lou, we said, well, Lou, here's a bunch of other ones to do. And he did all those. And then I expanded to other cities. And we've been doing this for a long time now. And I'm up to like 72 layouts I've collaborated with Lou on finding. And of course, Lou did all the photography and the art. Some of the articles he even wrote for him, many of them. So that's how my relationship with Lou developed. And of course, we met Cheryl as well, and my wife, Ruth Ann, and we became friends, and we do a lot of other things. We go to model railroad conventions together, some sightseeing trips, some other cool things together. So that's kind of how it all happened.
Oh, that sounds great. Next, I'd like to introduce another one of your friends, Lou, that's with us tonight, Jim Murphy. Jim, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here and to say some things about Lou that is one of my good buddies. I'm a retired professional engineer, traveled extensively during my time on the road, and about 30 years ago, I came to North Carolina from Western Massachusetts, but I brought my Boston and Maine and New Haven trains with me, set up what was a modular layout in my attic, and as we do in North Carolina, took the wheels off the trailer, and my Berkshire Short Line has been up in the upstairs of my training room since. About 10, 12 years ago, I'm involved with the local NMRA division, and we were the sponsors for a annual convention. Our MER regional convention was in the Raleigh-Durham area. I was on the clinic committee and was fortunate enough to be introduced to Lou and to doing some clinics and have a layout tour of his wonderful Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes. So after Lou has done a number of clinics, both for the division and regional level for us, he's a very popular clinician and always willing to come and help us out and present everything from scenery techniques to layout building to his wonderful structures that he has on the layout, and has never been bashful about sharing insight into his building techniques. His photography has just been so helpful in helping the division and the region by sponsoring these clinics. And we're just looking forward to having him in our next clinic, which will be our next convention, which will be in 2024. We're hosts again.
Well, that's great. Well, now, Lou, let's have one more of your guests here tonight, Kip Grant. Kip, welcome.
Hey, Jim, thank you. My background is, I've had many backgrounds professionally. Model railroad-wise, not counting the really nice American Flyer layout that I had as a boy with my brother, and a 4x8, what I'll call learning experience in my teens. I've been a serious modeler since 1992. And what I model is a what today they call a proto-freelance Delaware.
Lost your sound.
Lost everything.
Kip, we can't hear you at all. Okay, we'll come back to Kip. Well, listen, maybe let me ask each one of you again. if you can share some memories of with us for Lou. I know that all of you photos that maybe you'd like to share. So again, John, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think my photos were already shared in the sequence earlier.
Were they?
There it is. There it is again. Okay. Yeah, I'm just showing a few pictures of Lou's layout, his current layout, Lou and Cheryl's current layout, I should say, because Cheryl is heavily involved doing a lot of the scenery. But you can see what I'm showing in these photos is the quality and artistry of the scenery that Lou has done here. And that's what I admire a lot about Lou. His attention to detail of artistic and details on the scenery is just almost second to none. And you can see the quality here in the photos. There's another photo, I think, coming up somewhere. You can see a couple others. This one I liked because of the tractors on the flats. Not only they're attractive tractors and well done, but on the flats and just the whole scene again. You can see the background. You can also see in some of these pictures on the winter side, the puddles of snow and ice that look extremely realistic. And I don't know if you have one more. Yeah, and then this was the overall again that Lou talked about, and you get an idea of the whole comprehensive scenic look of the whole layout. And what you'll also notice is, and this is a trick that a lot of people do, well, seldom do people do it this well, but you notice none of the track is parallel to any edge. And that's what makes model railroads more artistically interesting and larger looking. And
right.
Very, very interesting. And there's hardly any straight track anywhere. It's all a little bit winding here and there. Again, a very artistic presentation.
Well, the detailing is just outstanding.
Yes, it's extremely well. I think that's what Lou enjoys the most. Of course, he's written several scenery books on how to do these techniques, and they're all techniques that he teaches people that are relatively doable. And the scenery is, to me and to Lou and some other people, is actually one of the easiest things to do in the hobby. Unfortunately, most of the hobby thinks it's one of the hardest things.
Yeah. Well, Jim, how about you?
Well, we're extremely grateful to Lou for all his participation in local, regional NMRA activities. So we were very pleased to present Lou with his Golden Spike Award when he had finished his basic 4x8 feet of finished railroad. Of course, his is considerably larger. It was scenic, it was wired, it was operational, all the qualifications for the first NMRA award, which is the Golden Spike. Also a way of thanking him for his participation in the conventions, and also the pleasure of meeting him for the first time, and for my wife as well, meeting Cheryl. And the wives have also become bonded in the model railroading world. So it's just been an absolute pleasure having Lou participate in all our activities and sharing his layout and my home layout with the wives. It's just been a truly wonderful experience.
Oh, that's great. That is fantastic. Congratulations, Lou, on getting the Gold Spike. That's a great first award.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, listen, one of the major modeling efforts that'll always be associated with you are the books that you've written, some of which are in second printings already. What got you started in that? I mean, how did that come about?
Well, a fellow whose name will appear a number of times in this little discussion, Dick Elwell and I got involved with the folks at MR called me one day and they said they really wanted to have a snow scene on their December 1992 issue of MR. And I talked to Dick about it, and we went ahead and we built the 4x8 layout in HO scale for that issue. And the photograph at the top, this top photograph is of an N scale layout we did the next year. But the HO layout came out so well they again asked me in 1993 if I could do the same thing, or if we could do the same thing. And I spoke to Dick, and we built the end scale layout on a door. And we did the same thing with that. We made up a winter scene that could be photographed, and we could utilize that for the December cover. And after that, about 1995, I was sitting in my garage on a warm summer day. I got a call from Bob Hayden, who was in charge of the book department at Comback at the time. And I imagine it was from those two articles. Bob asked me if I would like to write a beginner's how-to book for Comback. And that led to 5 books, 2 of which had second printings. And I also, at the same time, if you go to the next slide, I believe, I took part in Comback's Dream Plan Build DVD series, and I have how-to clinics, and most of those are have different clinics in each one of them, and I'm on a number of them. And I met Alan Keller. John mentioned Alan earlier. I met Alan Keller during this time, and with my photography with the magazine, and Alan doing his video, Great Model Railroad series, we got to be quite good friends. And Alan came to the house, and he shot Great Model Railroads Volume 23 for his series. And that's now on DVD, and I believe you can go to his Model Railroad Academy on the internet if it's still out there, and you can see the videos on the Model Railroad Academy too. And that's the West Hoosick division that was featured on that video.
Do you have a favorite of all the books you've written, of all the things you've done like this? Do you have something?
Yeah, I've got 2 favorite books. The first of the favorites is the first book, and I really enjoyed that one, and I felt very I felt as though that hopefully would bring new blood into the hobby. I was hoping that people who were starting to build railroad, who were intimidated by the scenery, which John said before, a lot of people are intimidated, even though him and I feel scenery is the easiest thing to do, and there's a lot of people who are intimidated by it. So I was hoping that book brought some new hobbyists into the hobby. And the last book was for another reason, and that is because I had a chance. The last 3, that was about the time that Tony Parisi had sent me that 0130 Forney, and I really wanted to get the taste of working in O scale and ON30. So I called Jeff Wilson at Comback's offices, and I said, could I include in the second or third, 2 or 3 chapters, the last 3 chapters in that book, some information on the ON30. And I built an ON30 6 by 2 foot module. And that's why I'm pretty happy about that one.
Working on anything new?
Yeah, I think the next slide might show it. Yep, there we go. Just in the last few months, Eric White I worked with Eric on it's not my book, but I do have some articles in it. And I also had the June issue of Model Railroad welcoming you back to South Strong, which was a comparison of real photos of South Strong done that were featured in Jerry DeVos's one of Jerry DeVos's books on the Sandy River, and there were a number of articles in that book. So I just finished that.
Gotcha. Well, Kip, welcome back. I'm glad that you got your computer unfrozen. So
we lost our internet, Jim.
So let me go back here a minute. I think where we lost you is I was asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you met Lou.
Well, I'm not sure where I dropped out, but as for me, I model a proto-freelance D&H branch from replicating Fort Edward to Glens Falls, New York, near where I am. And that I built it for photography and for operation, and I think we've achieved both of those goals. As for Lou, I met him when I was starting out in earnest in 1992. A friend of mine who knew I was starting to get my feet wet again said, I've got a layout I want you to see. And he brought me down to see Lou's layout. And when I got my jaw off the floor, I realized this is something I want to do. He took me down there to inspire me, and needless to say, I was, as you can imagine, inspired. I'd never seen anything like it. So for the next several years, Lou and I would cross paths occasionally, and then when he came to photograph my layout, which was 13 years ago, how time flies, we've become even closer.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, listen, we've been talking a little bit about the books that he's written and so forth, and the authorship that he is famous for. I'd like to ask the three people who are here as his friends tonight. Do you have a favorite? What do you think about the books that he's written? Does any one of them really stand out in your mind? Whoever wants.
I think the most recent one of the scenery books is the one that's my favorite, only because it has the most modern techniques that he's worked on represented in there. And so I think it's a very good summary for hobbyists to look at that one.
Well, my favorite is without a doubt How to Build Model Railroad Scenes, volume, don't know if that picks us up. There it is. Picks up, that's volume 2. This is my favorite Lou Sassi autograph copy. He presented a clinic at our convention. He was kind enough to autograph it for me, and I will apologize for the goop stain on page 23, where I was mixing up his recipe, which is not his own recipe, but it is the best goop ever made, and a lot of scenery has been done with that, including the sticky pages of my book. Thank you, Lou.
I don't think I have a favorite Lou Sassi book. I think all of Lou Sassi's books are my favorite, starting with the first one. Well, that was my favorite. Then the next one came out. Well, that was my new favorite. And I mean, each book just taught me more and more and more, and everything Lou comes out with, has just added to it.
Thank you.
Well, Lou, another thing you're really famous for, naturally, is the major efforts that you've made in photography of other people's model railroads and getting them published. People who may have thought they had a nice railroad, but never really thought they'd have a way of meeting somebody who would be able to get it published in Model Railroader for them. And you certainly have accomplished that. Do you have a team that works with you? I mean, how, with all these model railroads that you've been photographing around the country, you must have a team that you're working with.
Yeah, well, let me start at the beginning. I do have a team. It's a very small team. It consists of 2 people, but I'll start out in the beginning. That's my team right there. In mid-1980s, I got a call from Mike Tyler. I think a lot of people watching this might know Mike Tyler. His name is very well known in the hobby. Excellent modeler. But he also was a full-time school teacher. He was an art teacher in Massachusetts, Charlton, Massachusetts, actually. Same name town, but a few miles away from my Charlton. And he had a call from an individual who lived in Maine, Camden, Maine, actually, who wanted Mike to shoot his railroad for Model Railroader. And Mike, being a full-time art teacher, didn't have a lot of free time. Him and his wife also had a son, young son. And he called me to see if I would be interested in shooting that layout for Model Railroader. But since Cheryl was bringing in, working at General Electric full-time, and I was trying to bring in money here and there, I didn't want to use house money to go out and travel, take photo shoots, stay at hotels, pay all my expenses, and then find out that the magazine may or may not take the article after I finished it. I called my contact at MR, who at the time was Jim Kelly. And I asked Jim if they'd be willing to let me do that. And they said, not only would they be willing to let me do it, they would pay for my expenses and they'd pay me for the article up front And that is, as soon as they gave me the go ahead to do it, it was accepted. So we weren't doing it on speculation. And as far as my team that helps me is concerned, that I started out with Dick Elwell. Dick and Mike and I were all friends. And Dick was the first one to accompany me on these trips. We started with this layout in Maine. We went up and we shot it. Of course, it was accepted. And Dick and I got talking. And Dick was very well known in the Northeastern United States. I don't know if there's a model railroader, an active model railroad, scale model railroader that doesn't know Dick. And most of them have been to his house. So he said to me, I know a lot of guys that, that are worthy of getting their layouts photographed for the magazine. And Dick knows how to choose a good model railroad because of his own. So we started shooting layouts all over the Northeast. I would call Jim Kelly with some potentials, and Jim would say, go ahead and do them. And I also got to know Alan Keller around that time, because Alan, of course, worked for Kalmbach, and he also had gone out and started this video series, this video company he had. And him and I used to go back and forth with layouts. So he would call me and say he found a nice layout, or I would call him and say I found a good layout that was worthy of a video. And this was becoming something national. We started traveling all over the country. We went from the Northeast to as far south as Florida. We were out in California. We were in the long run, we went to over 38 of the 50 states. And I was also traveling to Canada to do photo shoots. So with this all going on, Dick also had a full-time job, and I didn't want to keep asking Dick to travel with me. So I hired a lighting technician, and it was very easy to do that because she used to come home for supper every night. So Cheryl became my lighting technician, and I paid her somewhat below minimum wage. Actually, meals, and that was about it. I guess it was meals. So her and I are the team. And
well, listen,
we are.
It's obvious to me that a lot of the people that you have photographed their layouts have really become friends.
Yep.
I know I have a friend here in Florida, David Sellers, that you came down and photographed his layout with your wife Cheryl years ago, and he still talks about it, and it's one of the great experiences of his life to be able to get it published in Model Railroader, and he really appreciated the way that you dealt with him, because he never dreamed that he would have his railroad photographed and published. And I imagine a lot of the people, or at least some of the people, I can't say a lot, that you've done the photography for and gotten their model railroads published must feel the same way. Do you stay in touch with a lot of them now?
Oh yeah, Dave. I remember Dave very well. Dave never thought it's a funny story because Dave never thought his layout was good enough for MR. John Addison found Dave's layout for me, and I can't remember how it all transpired, but I know I got some pictures of Dave, sent it to the magazine, to the editors. They said, go ahead and do it. And Dave's layout ended up on the cover of I think it ended up on the cover of Great Model Railroads, or at least it ended up in Great Model Railroads.
Yeah.
Which is supposed to be the best of the best. And evidently Dave was a little bit mistaken that his layout wasn't good enough. But if you want to go to the next picture, you'll see my photography team in action. No, you won't. I think we skipped it. It must have been the previous one. Yeah, let's go back a spot. Yep, there we are. There's my team. There's my lighting technician and my public relations person right there holding that backdrop. We can go on now.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you have a personal favorite? I mean, of all
Yeah.
the lands that you've visited and photographed, what's your favorite?
Yes, I do. And if you take the next picture and pop it up, you'll see it. And that is definitely Dick Elwell's layout. Dick Elwell is a lot like John Allen. His layout, his railroad is impressive in every way. I've seen good, scenic railroads. I've seen good operating railroads. I've seen the railroads with great bench work. great electronics, but he has a railroad that excels in every way. The scenery is beautiful. The motive power and rolling stock is realistically weathered and operates flawlessly. It's highly detailed. He introduced me to how to actually include telephone and power lines on my poles. And I guess he was really good at that because he was, for 45 years of his life, he was a lineman with New England Telephone. But be that as it may, he decided to come home and put everything on the railroad that he saw out there in real life. He even has a dispatcher's panel. That's the picture on the right here that does operate. And he has an operating telephone system for all the crews to interact with the dispatcher. And another thing he has is in most of his operating sessions that would usually be probably every other week before COVID hit, he would have 15 or 20 people there. He actually had an actual real railroad dispatcher operating the dispatcher's panel. So there are not too many of us that can claim that. They can claim having that going on. But yeah, that's Dick Elwell without a doubt.
Well, what about your friends? John, do you have a favorite of all the railroads that he's done? Please don't say yours.
No, definitely not mine. I would have to say it's a local modeler here that's incredible. Unfortunately, he moved and tore it down. He's starting over, but they're not really letting anybody in their house right now. But his name's Bob Lawson, and his structures and details are just phenomenal. He's not big into operation, but his scenes and buildings are just incredible. So I'd have to say that's my favorite. Lou shot that one once and was going to shoot it a second time, then he moved on us. But we're hoping we'll get a second time later on the new layout at some point.
Well, Jim Murphy, how about you? You got a favorite?
Well, it is awfully hard to say because since Lou has moved down to the Carolinas, he has shot 4 or 5 outstanding layouts. And it's just been an absolute thrill to see all of those published in Model Railroader. For many years, maybe the Deep South, Middle Atlantic region didn't quite get so much attention. So I'm kind of thrilled that Lou pretty much put us on the map.
And Rip, how about you? What's your favorite?
I hate to be redundant, if Lou will excuse me, but I'm going to go with Dick Elwell. Anything that, having the pleasure of seeing that layout in person 2-3 times a year, and we just go over sometimes and take Dick out to lunch. We never even run trains, but the photos that Lou has taken. Of course, Lou, you can't take a bad picture of Dick's layout.
No, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question, Lou. I'm a model railroader, and I'm really proud of my model railroad. I'm the only guy here tonight who hadn't had his model railroad photographed by you and published in Model Railroad. So what would I do? How can I? Who do I contact? What do I need to do to get your interest to take a look at my model railroad?
Well, I think you start out by looking at the layouts that are being published in Model Railroad magazines, Model Railroader, great Railroad Model Craftsman. Take a look at what they're publishing. The more finished scenery and the finer the details you have, the better off you're going to be. Make sure to have your motive power and your rolling stock and your structures all weathered and looking as realistic as possible. Make sure, especially since at least MR now, we do video for everything that gets published. So you want to make sure your trains run really well. And the layout, I feel that the layouts really to qualify for a shoot, they should be at least 50% finished, scenery and everything, 50% done. And nowadays it's all so easy with cell phones, and I don't know who doesn't own a cell phone today. You can always take photos with your cell phones and send it to me, so I can give you some pointers and opinions. And I think I talked to Jim earlier that he will put a link to my email address or an email for me, that if you've got something you think is worthy, or if you have questions or concerns, just get a hold of me. And if it looks like something we can work with, I can always hand it over to one of my scouts. One of my favorite number one scout is in the lower left of the screen right now. I've done about 300 photos. I've done about 300 layout shoots over the last 40 some years. And as John said, I think, what did you say, John? 70?
72.
You've done 72 of
And
them.
I've been in most of those
Okay.
shoots.
Yeah.
I've attended most of those shoots too, by
Yeah.
far the vast majority.
Yeah.
I'm one of his.
So I've got a 3-man. I've got a 2-man and a 1-girl team here.
Well, I do have an email. If anybody has a question for Lou, or would like to talk to him about getting his model railroad photographed and published, that email address is, and Dylan, if we could put that in the chat function so everybody can see it and write it down if they want. But that email address is Lou Sassi, LOUSASSI at Newtracks Modeling, NEWTRACKSMODELING.com. And if you have any questions or comments or just want to chat with Lou, he's extremely easy to talk to. I had never met him before. I called him up and he talked to me. So you don't have to be worried about trying to approach him. He's easily approached, and I think you'll have a pleasant surprise at how helpful he'll try to be in whatever you're trying to talk to him about. So Lou, we saw a while ago, before we introduced your friends, some of the photographs of the models that you have built in your modeling. So let's go back to that and take a picture and take a look at them and have you comment of it and your friends too. If you please just butt in, and all of you are open mics, so nobody's raising hands or anything. We're just a bunch of people sitting around talking. So if you have some comments about the photos, please chime in. So Dylan, if you could start some of the photos for us. Now, what am I seeing here, Lou?
This is Kingfield. This is the Kingfield side of the railroad. And this is as I said before, this is early summer. And this is one of my last projects, actually. You'll see more on this as we go through some more of these pictures. This was a Bachmann rail bus, rail truck. And what I did is I converted it over to a rail bus because the Sandy River had things like this, not exactly like this, but I'm modeling the mid 30s, and that's when the railroad was just about to get abandoned. So they were using rail buses quite a bit because their passenger service had dropped off. So I converted this Bachmann rail truck into a rail bus, and that's in Kingfield.
Next one.
And this is a building, it ended up, I was going to put on a module for my South Strong display that I had, but instead I wanted a little building to go in the foreground on the Kingfield side of the railroad. I saw, it's a little bit longer story than that. I found a building similar to this on eBay that I really wanted to pick up, but I didn't want to pay the exorbitant price for it. So I said, I had this laying around. So I just went to work with it. I just went to work on it. I weathered it. I added the screening on the windows. I put all the business that's laying around the ground outside of it, the buckets and the axe, the shelving and whatnot, and the garbage cans. And I made this. You'll see a photograph here in the program of the front of it. It's Jim Clark's furniture repair shop.
Look, one of the things I like about this is his weathering techniques. Look at the mud splatter on the bottom of the building walls. And then if you notice, those screens on the windows and the smokestack are not uniform colors, or a variety of colors. Reds and black, grimy blacks. And it's just very artistically done, very realistically done.
Thanks, John. That's all done. That's all. The majority of that's a multitude of different techniques, but I use dry colors. I use a lot of dry colors, and I used I cut the paint. I'm using water-based paints, and I thin it out a great deal just to create that gray washed out effect on the bottom, and combine that with the dry colors.
It's really, that's just beautiful work. No question about it.
Thanks, Jim.
Next.
And here's the front of the building. and it had to be a chair repair shop. So I I mounted a chair on the by the peak of the roof. And, I named it after a very good model railroad friend of mine, Jim Clark. He passed away a few years ago. He was a very nice guy, and he had a little railroad up in the attic of his house. He lived alone. He had lost his wife, and I went over. I gave him some pointers. He needed some help on the railroad. I actually gave him a building that I had sitting around for a while, but I named this in honor of Jim Clark's Furniture Repair.
Next.
And this is actually this is coming up. We better hold off on these, but this is going to come along with your next question, Jim.
Your level of detail is extraordinary. How do you work up a scene? How do you draw it on paper? What's your process?
No, actually, in all of the years I've done this, I've never drawn anything out on paper. I do it on the spot. I'll use the present. I'll use my present layout as an example. I'll look at the scene. I'll decide basically what I want, and then I'll start. Let me back up a little bit. On this railroad, the first thing I wanted visitors to see when they entered the room was I wanted something impressive. So I placed the Mountain View Hotel, which will show up in some slides here, upcoming slides. Don't bother going to them now. I'll mention it again when we find them. But I put the Mountain View Hotel right in the doorway. As you walked into the layout room, that's the first thing you saw. Then right on this layout is made out of a laminate of two-inch layers of styrofoam. And I just took a styrofoam pencil and I laid out the streets approximately where I wanted them to be. I knew which towns I wanted on each side of the railroad, and basically where the streets were going to go, where the buildings were going to be. So I laid out with a foam pencil where the streets would be. And then most of the buildings on here are replicas of actual buildings, and this is an example of that. On the left is the Strong post office. I had Rich Cobb build me up a post office that's a pretty close replica of Strong. I ended up putting it in Kingfield because when I started laying things out, that looked like a good spot for it. I might want to mention here that my HO layout, I build about 80% of the buildings on that layout. I met Rich Cobb at a show in Poughkeepsie, New York. Rich Cobb is a custom builder. And he builds anything, but one thing he does a lot of buildings. So I've had Rich build the majority of the buildings for me in this railroad. I have him build them, then I weather and detail them the way I want. I'll send him diagrams, I'll send him photographs of the prototype, and then I will do the final weathering and whatnot of the buildings. And I'd like to get back to how I plan the scene, and that's another reason these photos are in here. I add elevation to the scenes. I can't quite remember. You want to go to the next slide? There's a number of slides that show this. Okay, let's get into the buildings again. This building was this was actually Colonial Williamsburg. Cheryl and I did a trip up to Colonial Williamsburg, and this is a building that sat in Colonial Williamsburg. And I bought a book on that area, that Colonial Williamsburg. And in that book was a photograph of this building when it was an auto supply store. And I said, gee, that would look really cool on my railroad. So I had Rich whip me up that building in the lower right. And then when I got it, I added the white brick on the side, and I added all the signage around the building. And I added an addition on the side of it. You can just see a bit of it in the back. And I also added a fella putting the signs up. I weathered up a truck and I rolled up some signs. I got out some old magazines, and I have him applying signs to the side of the building. Next one, I think, is another illustration of that. Next slide. Okay, here's another instance where I replicated a real building. This is the Strong area of the railroad. This is this building, if anybody who's familiar with the Sandy River, if they looked at a photograph of Strong, this is unusual because in this one, you don't see Strong Station. It's just off to the right. They're tearing up the track. They're abandoning the railroad here. But that private residence in the background is in almost every photograph of Strong Station. So I had Rich, I drew up some plans, I sent some photographs, and I had Rich build the building in the lower right. And then I added some additional detail to it, and I placed it behind Strong Station. Okay. And here we have Strong Freight House, the Freight House in Strong. They don't make a kit out of that. They don't make a kit for that. Banta Models makes the station. You can see that to the left. So that's actually a Banta Model station, but the building, the freight house, Rich whipped that up for me from, again, drawings and photographs that I had sent to him. Then I added the platform and all the paraphernalia on the platform. Okay. And here I believe was talking, but I wanted to talk about elevation. Even though I don't draw this out on paper, I think I mentioned that before, that someone mentioned to me that elevation really makes a difference when you're viewing a scene. It doesn't have to be spectacular like John Allen's Gory and Defeated. Just an inch in elevation, a half an inch in elevation in HO or O scale can make a big difference. Here we're looking at, in the lower right, is the switch back up to Peerless Tanning Company, which is on the left. And what I've done is I've built the main street in Spring. This is in Kingfield. And if you look closely, you'll see that none of the buildings are sitting on a flat piece of ground. The ground drops from the right to the left. And each building is a slightly lower than the one next to it. And I think, in my mind, it adds a lot of realism to the scene. And we'll see that in the next photograph too. Here we're back over in Strong in this view. And this building also sits behind Strong Depot. This is one I had Rich scratch built this from some drawings. The old farmhouses up in the Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, in that area, the winters are so brutal that they never had their carriage houses separate from the building, from the house, from the living space. They always had some kind of a connection to the carriage house. And this is supposed to replicate a 1700s house that has a carriage house that's been turned into a garage. We're talking in the 30s now. And there's a enclosed breezeway between the house and the garage. And I did that. I raised the house about an inch above the station, so it wasn't hidden behind it when you view it from eye level. I'm up above, I'm on a chair right now with my camera high to shoot down on this, but I raised it up so you can see it behind the station. And I think that might be the last one, but let's give it a shot.
Did you have a blow up of that? Because this is the one with the retaining wall. Oh yeah. Could you go back to that one? And I want to comment that retaining wall. This is another example of the detail and what Lou does. See that timber crib retaining wall on the front of that building in the back middle, with the steps going through the retaining wall, and then the little landing, and then to the wood steps. I mean, all that is really nice detail. Most modelers would just slope the ground to the road and put in a gravel walk to the steps. But that is so much more interesting what he's got there. I don't know if you saw that in a photo or you just decided to do that, Lou. But
I just decided to do it. I thought it added visual interest to it. I think there's going to be another shot of this.
I think you have one later that has a close up of that.
I think so. I think it will be in there.
Lou, let me stop you right here a minute. We've got a question from one of the viewers on the YouTube. His question is, Lou, did you replace your modeling techniques with new ones over the years?
I'll have to ask my wife just a minute. No, I'm only kidding. Did I? I tried to improve on them. Whether I guess I have changed. I know that my woods, my trees, and the ones about Cheryl's, I changed a lot. I let Cheryl make them all now, so I got out of it completely. But yeah, I have changed techniques. I have. With the new technology, the new materials that are available, static grass and polyfiber and grass masters and all of this business. You'd be hard pressed not to change, because there's so much out there. There's so much available. The lawn in front of that building back in the old days, you might throw some sawdust on there to make it look like grass. That's actually static grass added with a grass master. All that, and since it's winter time, it isn't green, it's turned brown. So I've used that to create that effect. I've gotten away from, well, let's see, what else can I talk about here? That's about it. I've done that. John brought up ground goop. I don't think I mentioned that. I haven't mentioned that during this talk, and I wasn't planning on it, but whoever said that I wasn't, I think it was Jim who said I didn't invent ground goop. I didn't invent ground goop. I went to a National Model Railroad Association convention in Pittsburgh years ago with Dick Elwell, and Ken Olsen was there, and he gave a clinic on scenery. Ken Olsen was actually building dioramas for museums. Just exactly where, I don't remember, but I know he was doing it professionally. And lo and behold, he brought along ground goop, and he did a clinic on how to make ground goop and how to use it. And I walked out of that clinic the most enlightened model railroader you ever met. So much so that that's the only way I make scenery now, because it's so easy to do. It's very forgiving. That stays moist and workable for days. And if you store it and you haven't used it for a while, like, it's not like hydrocol where you have to mix it up and then watch the second hand on your watch time to go by until it sets up in your hand instead of on the layout. You can take ground goop and lay it out, and you can work it for the whole day, and you can come back the next day and wet it with some wet water, and you can rework it again the next day. And when we moved down here from New York, I had a jar. If you store it in an airtight container, we use Tupperware or something along those lines, it'll last for years. We brought it down from my HO layout up north, moved to Raleigh, and before I even had to use it, I had gone, 2 or 3 years had passed. I whipped open the container, threw a little more water in it, whipped it up, mixed it up, and used it on this layout. So it's wonderful stuff to work with. And I discovered that since I started doing scenery.
Okay. Let's have the next picture.
Okay, here, I think, I'm not sure if we're talking, adding power lines. I believe this is, well, this is kind of a combination of everything. You can see the power lines I learned this from Dick. Dick and I spent a lot of time on the phone when I initially started power lines, because I had questions for him constantly. But you can see here where the power lines are running across the front of the camera. You can see the transformers. You can see a meter box on the side of the hotel on the upper left-hand side. The other box that's running alongside the meter box is actually the telephone lines that are coming in. Power ran on the top of the poles. Telephone ran along the just below it. I think a minimum of 9 feet from power. You can see the telephone lines just below the power lines, which are on the very top of the pole. If you look at the upper right-hand photograph, again, you can see the power lines about 3/4 of the way up the pole, or I'm sorry, the telephone lines and the power lines at the top. And also, to get back to elevation changes, in both of those pictures, you can see that both buildings sit a little bit higher than the road. So it gives you that feel for a difference in elevation. They're built on a hillside. The hotel's on a hillside. The house is built on is a little above the road. And in the lower photograph, this was in an article in MR. I raised Peerless Tanning Company an inch above Kingfield Station again, so you could appreciate detail on it. So I just raised the railroad bed, and I built a concrete retaining wall between Peerless and the road in front of it, so that it could be raised up a little bit higher than the track in front of it. We'll go on to the next slide. Okay, now we're more into pole lines and power lines. And here we have, I mentioned I replicated real photographs. This is the winter store in, that was in Kingfield, and it is in Kingfield on the railroad, on my railroad. And here we have a pole in the foreground with a transformer just below the power lines. We've got feeders running to the transformer, then we got feeders running to the laterals over to the building on the left. They run down a pole into the building, and they're down the side of the pole, and you can see a meter box just to the left of the mailman who's putting his mail in the mailbox. On the building on the right, we got the same thing. Power's running to the power receptacles on the building, then down to a meter, and the telephone lines are running to to the side of the building, running down to a box holding the telephone and line stuff. Next picture. Here we've got a better view of the carriage house to the left. Here you can see the better view of the meter. You can see the telephone lines running, and they're running over the top of the false front on the building, and then down the side of the false front into the building. Next picture. And here we got another view of that house we were talking about behind Strong Station. We've got power running across to the roof. Because the roof of the station's so low, it would be too low for the power lines to run below that roof. So they would put a post coming up out of the roof with the receptacle for the power lines running to that, and then down to the meter on the building. Same thing with the hotel in the upper left. There again, another shot of that with the power meter on the building and the lines running to it. Okay.
Okay. Lou, who were the people who most influenced your modeling?
Well, I was influenced by a number of people, most of all in the early days by John Allen. Of course, I own John Allen's book, like many of us probably do. His photos in Model Railroader and Railroad Model Craftsman, the quality of his work, I mean, just was impressive. I've read every article I could find on John. When I started reading MR, I went back to my local hobby shop and I bought back issues years back just so I could find a John Allen article to read or a John Allen photograph. Another person who influenced me greatly, if you go to the next slide, is Dave Frary. And his scenery book, we're talking about how my scenery has changed and what I've done with it over the years. Dave was a really big influence on me as far as scenery is concerned. I picked up a lot of techniques from him, and I still do use today a lot of the techniques that him and Bob Hayden talk about in that book. And then, as you know, I love photographing the railroads. In the next picture, you'll see Bruce Knoll's Model Railroading Guide to Model Photography, and that should be coming up next. And even today, that is the Model Railroader's book, the photography book to go by. I mean, digital photography has taken over, but there's so many techniques and pointers here and suggestions that really work. A model railroad photographer is not your average photographer. He's not a wedding photographer. He's not he specializes. It's a special type of photography, and this book covers the things you should know as a model railroad photographer. Excellent read. And then finally, I was as everybody's probably figured out by now, I was very influenced by my good friend Dick Elwell. Among all the other layouts I shot over the years, I managed to shoot Dick's, I think, 4 times for Model Railroader. It was on the cover of Model Railroader at least once, and I know it's been in here. It's been in Great Model Railroads twice. So he has at least 3 or 4 covers on his railroad that I've done. And there on the right is one of the pictures of his railroad, which is just stunning.
Lou, I hate to interrupt you again, but we've got another question from one of the viewers.
Yeah.
And the question is, what are your roads made from?
Well, when I had the West Tuzik division, which was supposed to be 1950s, I was making my roads out of styrene initially. And then I went to Scalecrete. I was using Scalecrete. And Scalecrete is really, I think you can also buy it in Lowe's. It's spackling. It's some kind of a spackling compound, or it's like a mortar mix. I can't remember the exact name of it. If you want to contact me, I can give you the name of it. But I'm not sure if they still make Scalecrete or not. But that worked really, really well. And that's what I made my concrete roads out of, and my blacktop roads. If it was a concrete road, I would paint it with flocal concrete or polyscale concrete. If it was blacktop, I just painted it engine black. In the case of this railroad, I don't have any concrete or blacktop roads. So everything's made with ground goop and very finely sifted real dirt. And the joy of ground goop is when you do this, you can put your ruts and everything right in the road by just rolling an old wheel set through the goop and creating ruts in the roads. So I use that technique for the dirt roads.
And then one, Anthony also asked, what are your power lines made from?
That's some real technical stuff there. It's thread. It's button thread and heavier duty shoe thread. Leather thread, something you would use for leather. You can pick it, you can pick the stuff up. Well, if they're like hobby shops and they're all closing all over the place. I used to be able to pick them up at a shoe shop, at a shoe repair shop. I wish you the best of luck finding one. But I mean, thread can be bought at Michael's or whatever. Michael's might even carry the heavier duty thread too. And what you do with it, as long as we're getting into the thread, I learned this from Dick. And what he does is he'll take the thread, tie it on a rafter or something in the attic. Then you take some just regular old Elmer's white glue. You tie a nut, you tie something heavy at the other end of the thread, make it about 3 or 4 feet long. Then you run your fingers along the thread with the white glue on your fingers. When it dries, it stiffens it, and you can create the sag that you will see in power in the telephone lines. So I do that. I do that with the power lines. The telephone lines, I just hang them. I just hang the thread between the poles, and it's affixed with just a little dot of Elmer's white glue.
Okay. Let's go to another picture, Dylan.
Yeah, I'm not sure what this one's all about. What were you going to ask me, Jim?
I don't know what this one is about either. I know it. I know it has the power line. I know it has.
It looks like power lines to me.
Yeah, it might be power lines. It could also be the smoke I'm going to talk about.
It's smoke. You talk about you're into smoke now.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll wait until we get to that. We'll wait.
Yeah. Let me do that.
Yeah, but this is just another example. We can see that this is the Mountain View house again, and we got a closer view. Here you can see even better the difference in elevation.
Yeah.
And
the elevation really does make a difference. I hadn't really paid that much attention to it when I first saw this photo. But
I know exactly what this is. I just looked at my notes, and you were talking about detailing. And one of the things that I said when you asked me about that was, or what I was going to say, is what I try to do is make a scene tell a story. And by making a scene tell a story, there's no better way to do that than to have your figures interacting either with each other or with what's going on. I use that both on the railroad for static scenes, or I use it on the railroad when I'm taking a photograph. Now, if I was going to take a photo, if I took a photograph of this and had the engine running by the hotel with nothing else going on, it's a good photograph. But now you're looking at the locomotive, you look over to the left and you see the popcorn truck with all the folks that are buying their popcorn. They've seen the locomotive and now they're checking it out. The fella who's working at the hotel is sweeping the front sidewalk, where he has to take a break and check things out also, as is the other individual standing on the porch behind his flag. And if you go to the next shot, we'll see another example of that. Here we have, I've noticed this lately. I've been putting my figures so that at least one of them looks at the camera. And that really increases the interest it draws you into the picture. You see the locomotive, you see the flat cars, whatnot. The crew is standing along the train, and at least one of them is glancing at the camera. Next.
I never thought about that. Is an excellent tip. All right, guys.
Okay, here we have another view of the National Auto Store. And you could just have the store, and you could have the furniture repair shop. But by placing a delivery truck in front of the shop and having the driver waiting for a fella to repair the front tire, We've got the driver looking at the camera. We've got the fellow wandering into the repair shop. We've got the fellow standing outside the automotive store who is dressed in the same color combination as his car. So you know he's a hot ticket. So he's getting in his car, leaving the National Auto Store. So having the scene tell a story, I think, really increases the interest in the scene.
These look so prototypical when you look at them. I mean, if you didn't know it was a model and you just glanced at it, you might say, yeah, that looks so real. That's got to be the prototype. You must feel that. I mean, you must use the prototype a lot in your modeling.
Exactly. And I think one of the questions here was how I enjoy detailing, and you try to quit when it looks right. And you can do that by studying photographs, prototypical photographs. And I'm fortunate because I'm replicating real structures that I can look at what goes on around them. And you quit when you feel you've reached the point of that you've reached what you want to. And if you want to go back in detail, it's just like doing scenery. You can always add detail. I think there's some people out there who over detail a scene. You can lose realism by adding too much detail just as much as you can lose realism by not adding enough. You have to know when to quit, and that only comes with experience, with doing it and practicing and playing around with it. Let's see what we have next. Okay, here's a good example. Here we can see a difference in elevation, because in the foreground we have the standard gauge tracks and narrow gauge track behind them. Now you can see that switchback up to Peerless Tanning Company. He's in the first stage of the switchback. We have the young lady up on Phil's Over the Hill general store, glancing at the fellow who's walking the roof walk on the boxcar. And then we have the fellow in the foreground who's just throwing the switch stand. He's also checking out the fellow in the boxcar to make sure he doesn't get too wound up and looking at that gal over there and falling off the car and hurting himself. So we've got an interaction of people in the scene, which adds detail to the scene. We also have a group of boys having a checker game on the front porch, just to the left of the young lady sweeping. And here's what John was talking about earlier. And what I've done here, let's talk about elevation change. You can see where the driveway goes up into the garage, into the carriage house, which is now a garage. We're talking about what I use for roads. This is the ground goop, and you can see where I've made some indentations into the goop to look like the tires of the car have sunken into the driveway a bit. And rather than just having the ground slope down to the road behind the station, I had some railroad ties laying around that I had from my HO railroad. So I just stained them and made a railroad tie retaining wall, which would be a natural thing for somebody to do in a house like that. Living right next to the railroad, use railroad ties were always laying them around, and it would be no big deal at all. You grab a few of those and make a retaining wall. Also, the stones in front of the stairway were stones that I picked up from a well point drilling that was done right by our home, and I just filtered them out and got some flat stones and made that little, rather than making a concrete or a dirt walkway to the house, I made it out of flagstone. And we had the fellow sitting on the steps playing his guitar while his dog looks on, and we have one of his friends who's just showed up. They're going to have a little jam session later in the evening.
And Lou, you also had the garage doors open for entrance with the vehicle in there.
Yeah.
And then you have next to the troubadour, you have a mailbox on a post.
Yeah.
How many people model mailboxes on a post when they model houses? I think very few.
Yeah. Well, it's a rural. You're really looking at a rural setting, and that's where the mailbox comes.
And check out the woods to the left. It's not just a homogeneous woods. It's got a mixture of different things going on.
Right.
All of that creates the scene, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's just absolutely outstanding modeling that you do, Lou, because it's, it does look like a prototype building, no question in my mind.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
What's next? Let me ask a question here. Your friends have seen your modeling for years. They know what they like, and they know what comments they've made to you in the past. I'd like to know what really stands out about your modeling to them. John, if you when you look at what Lou does on his model railroad and to a scene, is there something that really stands out to you?
Well, I mentioned, I think you want to remove John Allen's picture here too.
Yeah.
Go back
Yeah.
to the gallery view, if you will. There you go. I mentioned about the detail and the textures. I think texture is a good word, but also composition. The artistic, we talked a lot about that just now in all these pictures. The composition of the scene is very important. It can't be just square lines and no figures and just simple stuff and ground foam of the same color everywhere. It's got to have all those qualities that Lou does in the scenery. It's very obvious that Lou enjoys and has a passion for scenery. I think that's probably his most favorite part of the hobby. And what's interesting is that carries over wonderfully into his photographic career of photographing model railroads from other people, because he can see all those cool scenes. He can instantly recognize what's a really good composition and a really good scene to, and then the rest of it's just the technology of photography. But really, it's this artistic ability, I think, is important.
Jim, how about you?
Well, one of the, we hate to make comparisons over the years, but one of my all-time favorite modelers was Frank Ellison and his Delta lines. Yeah. And his philosophy, and he had a background in theater, and I've touched on it myself, so I can sympathize. One of his sayings was that the layout is the stage, and the trains are the actors. Well, a step beyond that also is the scenery that goes onto the layout really is the backdrop on the stage. And Lou has been able to capture that backdrop of the stage that enhances the layout and the trains without overpowering it. His scenery and structures are always period correct. For instance, there's a ball signal in there that just says, "Hey, I'm 1925," when they used manual ball signals. So he's been able to incorporate the scenery as the background on the stage that's the layout, featuring the actors, those wonderful ON 30 locomotives and cars that he's put together there. So it's really a whole staged scene that we're very comfortable with. It's period correct, and it's really enjoyable.
Kip, how about you?
If I can just amplify or repeat what John and Jim have already said, because I think we've all been struck by pretty much the same thing. It's how Lou manages to blend simplicity with detail and make it all seem so real. If you look at any of those photos we've seen during the past hour, there's a lot of simplicity in them. The simplicity of real life, not overly detailed, but a lot of detail, believable. You want to be in those scenes. That's what he does. And the way he writes his books and just the standalone articles about all of the components that go into the modeling, whether it be how to make a culvert, how to make a road, how he made a tree, how he did pole lines, and then produce them in a scene. And it becomes so much more than the sum of all those individual parts. It's so striking, and that's what he does.
You know what really strikes me when I look at the photos and hear Lou talk? Lou is not a model railroader. Lou is much more than that. Lou has created a real life scene that his model railroad runs through. And it's visible. You can see it. You can feel it when you look at it. You know exactly where you are. You know exactly what those people are doing. You can almost hear them think. And the train just happens to be a part of it. It's not overwhelming. It's not less than. It's just a part of it. And I just, you know, a lot of model railroads I see don't have that quality, but the photographs that I've seen and the scenes that I've seen from Lou create, that's the impression that I get, that this is something that is really unique in our hobby. And the way that he presents it is in a way that I just very, very few times have I ever seen anything that comes close to what I've seen Lou do tonight. Lou, another one of your viewers, Steve, wants to know if you use forced perspective at all.
Yes, I have. Not to a great deal, because the layout is very shallow. But what I've done, I've used mainly with my vehicles. I've used 1/43rd scale vehicles in the foreground, and I've used some slightly smaller scale vehicles in the background, and the woods beyond that white farmhouse that you just saw. I don't have a photograph of it, but I've used a slightly smaller scale truck there and a number of other places. Well, actually, the house, the car in that house that we were just talking about is slightly smaller than the 1/43rd scale, just to give it a touch of distance, make it a little bit smaller, and in the woods and whatnot, that type of thing. I have used a bit of forced perspective, yes.
Do you see your modeling as almost a sculpture, painting?
Yes, I do. I think in not just in my case, but in case of any model railroader who's into scenery, I believe it really is three-dimensional art. It's more like a sculpture, but a sculpture that you can interact with. The nice thing about being a model railroad is that it's you can interact with it. If you're into operation like Dick Gelwell is, not only can you stand around and look at static scenes, three-dimensional scenes, and enjoy them. If you're in an operating session, you can actually run your trains through them. So there's a whole new dimension to it when you're a model railroader.
You all agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, I don't enjoy operating on a layout without scenery because it wrecks the effect for me. It doesn't seem real. But if you have scenery, you can get immersed in it. And that's why some of these double deck layouts and triple deck layouts people have nowadays to get more running length. They say if you scenic them well, you just concentrate on your one level and you kind of blank out the other levels, and that makes them great.
Jim, you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I have operated on the plywood deserts. We have way too many of those. And I can appreciate it. Yeah, it's fun for operations, but there is nothing like operating on a layout, even if it's small. Just switching some car cards around. Use a real simple car forwarding and small trains. But just the fact that you're going through a recognizable area, it's very easy to visualize strong on Lou's layout because I've been there. I've spent time on the main 2 footers back. I made my pilgrimage to Alna, Maine years ago. And the fact that those scenes are recreated on Lou's layout just makes operation a pure joy. Just watching the trains go through those actual towns and through that locale, and just feeling the chill of the winter snow on the layout just brings back very fond memories.
Lou, one of the viewers, Tony, wants to know if you've ever seen 1/64 scale or S scale farm scenes.
If I have, I can't recall. Don't do much S scale. I think I actually have shot an S scale layout or two, but it was quite a while ago. I don't recall farm scenes. Sorry.
There's a major hobby for farm modeling
Oh,
in S scale.
okay.
And some of the models, they have an annual convention,
Oh,
and the people spend $20,000 per display that they prepare over the course of time to enter in the contest and so forth, in that kind of thing. They're just gorgeous models. They really are. And I don't know if Tony's a farm modeler or not, but that may be part of his background. At least he may be involved in that.
sounds like I might have to get going with some John Deere tractors here, or maybe some farmals.
Absolutely, and I'll tell
Or
you,
Alice Chalmers.
That's it.
It could be forced perspective for you, Lou, because you're old.
That's true.
Lou, if you could talk to one person that you've never met, who would that be?
Well, I think it's probably time for the next slide.
There it is.
And I probably, if I got to meet John, I probably would have more than one question, but I guess what I'd ask him was his thoughts regarding the scenic and operational realism and how he approached it on his railroad, how he approached achieving it, and his thoughts on how he made his models look so realistic in his photographs. One point I want to make here is that now these two pictures I provided for the talk, the one on the left is of his present Quarry Undefeated, and there's a fellow up in New York right now, Randy Decker, who's actually thinks so much of John Allen. I don't know how many of the guys here have seen this, but Randy is replicating John's entire layout.
Yeah.
And I think it was in Tony Custer's book last year. I think he had a shot of this scene that I took. Another thing I wanted to mention about John is here we have a shot on the right, and that was taken on his second Gory Undefeated. That shot has to go back to the mid-50s, I would guess, at the latest. And he was hand painting clouds in the background. And I don't know how many of you guys can remember seeing cloud effects on 1950s model railroads of any scale. So this guy I think John was so way ahead of his time. It was just amazing modeler.
Don't you remember those photographs that what Barney used to have of John's layout on the back of the model railroader?
Yep.
And the PFM brass models.
Yep.
Unbelievable, weren't they?
Again, it helped that he was a professional photographer. I don't know if he was ever artistically trained, but it sure looks like it.
I don't know.
Oh, it really does. And the gentleman that you mentioned, Lou Decker, when he gets his finished, it's going to be it's really going to be something to see, because he is really doing everything that he possibly can to recreate it.
Yeah, he's not a model railroader. Randy was not a model railroader. He called me here at least 2 or 3 years ago now. Time goes by so fast.
Yes.
He mentioned that he's on the internet. He's on social media. He had stuff all over that about the railroad. And the more I read about it, the more impressed I became with what he's trying to achieve. And when we shot that photograph, we shot some other photographs of equipment that he had actually acquired that John had on the railroad. And the picture I took was of Jim Finley's locomotive, and everybody probably, the older modelers probably remember Jim Finley. Yeah. And Randy is acquiring all this stuff, and he's taking the best shot at it. This thing should be really something if and when he gets it finished.
Well, he's really spending everything that he can on it. I mean, it's going to be first class, no question about it.
Yeah, it is.
So let me ask you gentlemen this. You hear good and bad about our hobby of model railroading today. What do you all think about it? Is it dying, as some people say? Is it getting better, as some people say? Where is the hobby of model railroading going in the future?
Well, I guess this is all about me, so I suppose I'll answer first. It seems like all the hobby shops in the country are being replaced by online suppliers. There's good versus bad features of both of these. I myself I've always enjoyed the hobby shops. I kind of miss that one-on-one in-person interaction between yourself and the hobby shop owner or the worker. And if you needed something small, like a bottle of paint, so a few paintbrushes, whatever, you could go over to the hobby shop and you could pick them up one at a time. You didn't have to go on eBay and buy a dozen to get what you wanted. But there again, I mean, with today's technology and today's internet availability, the availability of stuff on the internet is it's just mind-boggling what you can find on the internet if you look long enough. I do recognize during the conventions and railroad shows that I've been going to, and I've especially in the Cincinnati area and this area, I've attended the conventions, and I've noticed that Saturday is the day for avid model railroaders, and Sunday is the day for younger people, for the married couples with the kids and whatnot. And on Sundays, they're pretty busy. The parking lot's pretty full, and there's quite a few people. There's a standing room only, and many times early in the day on a Sunday. So hopefully, the hobby is still coming along nicely, as far as I'm concerned.
John, how about you?
Yeah, I see a lot more younger modelers than you might see at most meetings. The problem is the younger modelers tend to not be joiners into organized groups like NMRA and other structured venues. They tend to have their own informal network. It's probably, again, like the internet Lou was talking about. It's about the internet and social media. They're all conversing with each other and sharing with each other and other people all around the world, but they're not then doing the more traditional in-person meetings. So many of us older ones that are involved in more structured environments like NMRA don't see them that much, but they're actually out there, and I've seen them. And another thing I've seen in the hobby is there are a ton of young photographers of rail trains, rail fans. There are a ton, and some of those are undoubtedly going to be modelers as well. But there are a ton. In fact, I would say most rail fans are young nowadays. It's just kind of the opposite of the modeling communities that we think. So I think there is hope. And the other part of the technology nowadays is incredible in the hobby. And we have got the best of the best technology all the time. All the equipment is super realistic nowadays, way more than it used to be in the old days. The problem is it's also very high cost to buy those new things. But I think there's a huge market for used merchandise that's excellent condition that all of us here grew up with. You can buy a very good locomotive for under $50 and do a little detailing or work on it, and you can have an excellent runner. So you don't have to go buy the Broadway Limiteds and all the high-end stuff for $400, $500, $600 to get into this hobby.
What I'm seeing as a person of age is that easy, Jim. We're in the same boat. We understand that we, as older modelers, need to keep up with some of this new technology. The most recent activity we've had, for instance, during the COVID, my NMRA division went to Zoom meetings so that we could stay in touch. By inviting new people into those Zoom meetings, we were able to appeal to some of our younger members. We encouraged, we still ran the annual train shows, and we saw a lot of young people. So we made sure we were out there promoting our Zoom meetings, promoting the NMRA through the internet. We have new members joining NMRA, which I've always encouraged, but some of them had never been to an actual NMRA division or region or national meet, but just by participating in NMRA, getting the magazine, and some of them are only getting it as emails, that encourages them to come out and find where these local meetings are being held, attend, and that's why we see some new, young, fresh faces. And I think that's going to be a secret. We as older modelers are going to spend a lot more time on the internet, a lot more Zoom meetings like New Tracks Modeling to attract younger folk, and participating in our local meets where we can still get face to face with some of our younger people.
Yep. How about you?
That's the nice thing about being third in these, because I get to agree with everybody else. What Jim says has merit. What John said has merit. The youngins are out there. And I think they do tend to be maybe more closet model railroaders. They are trackside. There's no question about that. They're trackside. And you know, we old fogies, we model the old days, our old days. And but you know, you look at the ads in any of the trades, and you know, there's a lot of very modern stuff being produced. Every time you turn around, somebody's building something that I can't even relate to, but it's out there on the rails in real life. Somebody's buying this stuff. It's probably not us. So yeah, they're out there. We just maybe don't know about them to the degree that maybe we should.
You know that everybody talks about the young people coming into the hobby to save the hobby and so forth. I like to talk about the middle-aged people that are coming into the hobby again, that have been out of the hobby for a long time because of whatever you went through as a teenager. Your mind drifted away from model railroading and the basement and so forth, and went to cars and other activities that you got involved with. But now your kids,
you can say girls, it's okay.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
well, you know, these days, Kip, I'm not sure. So anyway, no offense to anybody, I promise. So anyway, you know, I hear a lot of people on my show say, you know, we've been sitting in a chair for a while. We've been thinking about the hobby that we had when we were young and a kid, and worked with our dad, our granddad, and so forth. And you know, we picked up this kit and we started building this kit, and all of a sudden, all of those good memories that we had come flying back, and we become a model railroader again. And I think there's a large audience out there of people like that that shouldn't be forgotten and should be encouraged to come back into our hobby again. We've got another question for you from a viewer. Dan wants to know if you would be interested in helping to mentor or guide people under 30 years of age.
Sure. Age is no problem for me. I've got plenty of it. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Another viewer wants to know if you've ever used or currently use a 3D printer.
No, I haven't. And boy, would I like to. I know some individuals who have. A good friend of ours, he was going to be on here, Ron Hill. He's 3D printed a number of things on his railroad. And trust me, they're beautiful. I've seen some 3D vehicle printing. Haven't done it, but I've seen some done that way. Bob Lawson, I think, up in Cincinnati, has a vehicle, at least one vehicle that had been 3D printed. Pretty impressive stuff. Very impressive.
Anthony wants an answer to this question. This is a good question. He wants to know why Europeans have more detail on their railroads.
Not being European, I'm not sure whether this is going to be the right answer, but I've got a pretty good guess. And I believe it's because they generally have smaller spaces to work in. In Europe, just like the countries, and we have countries in Europe that are smaller than the states in the United States. And we have Europeans, if you've ever watched any of these English programs on TV or any other place in Europe. My wife and I were fortunate enough to go to Europe, to go to Italy a few years ago. It's nothing like the United States. You don't see these vast expanses of roads, and people don't have property, you know, an acre and a half of land, that type of thing. And it's by the same token, they don't live in houses that are 2,000 and 3,000 square feet. So when you're working in a smaller area, the only way to go is with more detail. I'm kind of glad they do it that way, because it allows them to add more detail to their scenery and to whatever they're working on. But I think that is probably one of the reasons why you see them dwelling on a detail more than maybe your average American modeler does.
Couldn't agree more with you. I hear it from people in Europe all the time. That's exactly what they say. That's exactly what they do and they concentrate on.
Mhm.
So, Lou, you've done so much in your life so far. So, at this stage of your life, what are you doing now? What's your modeling focus now?
Well, right now, the company arborist and I are diligently working on that ON30 railroad. You saw some images up here.
Now,
Right?
let's see, the arborist, is that the lighting expert?
That's my arborist, my lighting technician. My let's see what else. My executive chef.
Publicist.
Publicist. Publicist. That's what I said, John.
Yeah.
She's my. Let's see. You're my everything. She's just
Stage
about
manager.
everything. And boy, I'll tell you, she gets paid a pittance for all that.
She's your CFO. She's your CFO as well.
Chief Operating Officer, right? Public relations person. Public relations. And I got so lost in all of that, I don't remember what my answer. Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
So
My public relations person and I are working on our ON30 radio and layout in the bonus room of our house. We're still doing photo shoots for Combach, although we're cutting back a bit on the distance we travel and the number of shoots we do a year. And let's see, what else are we up to? We're enjoying adding, well, I'm enjoying adding detail to the various scenes on the layout. And I'm also doing smaller detailing projects. And if you want to show some more pictures here, I can talk about them, including some of my rolling stock. Here we have, I'll give you some examples of what I've been up to. This is going to be an article. Most of these are going to end up hopefully being articles in Model Railroader. I've been detailing rolling stock. Here I've taken some pulpwood cars that were very prominent on the Sandy River. These are Bachmann cars. I've replaced the plastic framework on the car. If you take the next, go to the next picture, I've replaced it with real wood. I also replaced the deck with real wood. And if you want to go to the next picture, if you want to be a real masochist some night, you can go out in your front yard and pick up the sticks around your river birch tree, and you can add individual pulpwood piles to those cars. I wouldn't want to do 100 of these at a pop, but I did do I did a few cars with this technique, and I've replaced that resin casting with individual sticks of pulpwood. Take the next shot, and you'll see what happened when I finished. And here we have a couple of them. I've actually finished loading this car in the foreground now. And this again is another article that should be an MR sometime in the future. Next shot. Okay, this is another, I got some compliments on this car. This is the car you saw earlier in this talk with the tractors on it. And I've added a wood decking over the plastic decking on the car. Go ahead. And these tractors are probably not out there right now. These are actually Ukrainian models. And I painted up some of these tractors. I picked them up from the narrow gauge supply company. And I did a couple tractors. And if you want to go again, it's called the Narrow Gauge Model Company. And here we're loading them on that flat car. I'm chaining them down with some chain I picked up. Go ahead. And here they are on a train coming into Kingfield. Next shot. I've also been dabbling with some. These are again from Ukraine. I've been dabbling. I needed a dump truck for the winter mill on the north end of the layout. That was featured. You can see that in the background of these this last couple articles that Cheryl and I had an MR in July and August. That's the winter mill pond that we did behind this building. But they needed to reface the parking lot of the mill, so they dumped some gravel in there with that truck. I had to build a dump truck, so that was made up of these two trucks you see in the upper left. Next shot. And here I wanted to prove to myself that I could still build a building all by myself So I picked up a Bar Mills kit and I built this. And this was the last building I put into Kingfield. It's between Phil's Over the Hill and the post office. So I took this kit and built it up, and I just installed that and not too long ago. Next shot. And we were back to that rail truck that I made into a rail bus. And this again is another article I've written for the magazine, and you can see the truck as it came from Bachman in the upper left. And I'm building the body for the truck out of strip and sheet styrene. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see the finished truck, the finished bus rather. And that's in Kingfield. Okay, next slide. Okay, here's another truck. This actually is a Tin's Toys. It's actually a child's spring-loaded children's toy. You would pull that back, and those rear tires were spring-loaded, so you could shoot that thing across your mother's kitchen if you wanted to. And hopefully it wouldn't smash into anything and chip up the woodwork. But I took it, ripped all that out of it, and I shortened the frame of it, and I made a new bed, and I added some detail, and I've got a few of these wandering around the roads on the railroad. You're going to see some other ones coming up here next. Okay, we're back to another one of those models from the Ukraine. That was two different trucks. I kit bashed them into a tanker truck, and that's over on the strong side of the layout. Next shot. And here we're at Fensters. This is another Bar Mills kit that I picked up from a fellow up in, I think Tom Staten, I believe it was, up in New York. He ripped down his old gauge layout, and I bought a couple buildings off of him. This is one of them. So we have another one of those Tin's Toys trucks parked in front of the Farm Fresh Produce, and we have a Fortune tractor parked on the left that I did a detailing and painting job on. Here I've gotten into painting artista figures using Dave Ravella's techniques, and I've got these. Kevin Becomber sold me a couple of these Devco milk trucks, and what I did is I added the drivers. I took some artista figures, some unpainted artista figures. This guy had a bare head, so I gave him a paper hat, painted it up to look like it matched the truck. It's a Parmelli Brothers dairy products, and I've got him opening the door to the truck to grab himself some milk bottles. Next shot, please. And here we have another Devco truck. This is over on the Kingfield side, and the boys are just kibitzing a little bit here as he takes his milk bottles out to deliver them. And those were both painted with Dave's techniques. Okay. And I think this is just of another person I've painted. It's another artista figure. You see the fellow looking at the camera, and the engineer and the locomotive was hand painted by me. This is over at the engine house in Kingfield. Oh, I know what it was. One thing I felt missing in the photos of my steam engines was the lack of smoke. So I was very fortunate. The boys actually, both of my sons were very fortunate to have married very talented women, just as I did. And my youngest son, Eric's wife, happens to be a clothing designer in New York City. And after I was doing some research on the Adobe Photoshop and whatnot, and she uses that all the time when she's designing clothes. So she came home, and she came to the house. Her and Eric came to the house for the Christmas one year, and she spent about an hour with me, and she taped it. And she explained to me how to use Photoshop elements and add smoke. And after she left, I spent about a week practicing, and I ended up with some of these photographs you see here. If you want to go through the photographs, we've got at least a couple of them here, I think. Yeah, here we have some drifting smoke, an engine in front of the Mountain View house. This is some of Cheryl's. You'll be seeing more of these trees in an upcoming meeting. These are some of Cheryl's pine trees that she's been done for me on the railroad. But here we can see the smoke coming out of engine 10 as it passes slowly passes the hotel. Next photo. And here we have an engine spotting one of those pulpwood cars, and this is over in Strong with the early winter backdrop behind the engine. Bill Brown provided me with that photograph on the backdrop. We used photos for the background in this layout. It's self-stick rolled. He blends all the photographs together, and then he sends you whatever length you want, and you can just stick it to your background. But that's the smoke drifting out of the smokestack in engine 15 and Strong.
One of the viewers once asked, what camera do you use for your photos?
I use all Nikons. I started out with Canon years and years ago when I was into film, but I took all of my equipment. I took all of my film to be developed at a Nikon dealer. And the fellow that ran the Nikon dealer, kept telling me I should switch to Nikon. And he wanted me to do it so badly that he would loan me his Nikons from the shop. And I could take them and use them to shoot with. And I really did like them. So I switched to Nikon years ago. And now, even when I went digital, I've stayed with Nikon. Right now, I'm using D300s to shoot with.
Okay.
And here we have another smoke effect. This I did in black and white, but you can see the smoke coming out of engine 18. And let's see if we have anything else regarding that. Next slide. Okay, no, this is stacking. Another thing I haven't experimented with it. I think I've learned how to do it. Is I was seeing a lot of people were talking about helicon focus and creating better depth of field in your photographs, and especially in N scale. In O scale, it's not quite as difficult, but especially in N scale, it's very difficult to get good depth of field, especially when you're doing a close up. So I played around with helicon and whatnot, or I didn't play with it. I just thought about purchasing it, but then I was researching on the internet one day, and up pops this information that Apple has a stacking program. And believe it or not, I have an Apple computer. So I called the folks at Apple, and lo and behold, they had a very inexpensive stacking program available that I downloaded into the computer. And stacking photographs is like doing scenery. It's the easiest thing I've ever done. It's just a matter of taking 2 or 3 different photographs. You focus the camera on different areas of the photo. You start in the foreground, you focus back maybe about 1/3 of the way back, 2/3 of the way back, and then all the way to the back of the photo. And if before you do it, you end up with a photograph like this, and after you stack them and let the stacking process take its course, you end up with something like this. And if you want to jump back and forth a little bit, you can take a look at the Peerless sign in the second photograph versus the Peerless sign in the first one, in the Kingfield sign, in the figures. I was focused on the tree in the foreground, which you naturally would do. And let's go to the second one. You can see that in the stacked photograph, everything is clear. Everything is clear. Quite a difference.
Really is. It's just phenomenally different. I've never seen that done before. Was that hard to do?
No, as I said, there's really nothing to it. I mean, you got to know a little bit about photography. You got to have a manual camera that you can focus manually. You can't do it with an automatic camera because that'll just focus where it wants to. You've got to be able to focus at different positions in the photograph. In other words, like right here, for example, let's just look at this photo. This is the good one, but let me explain where I focused. I put the camera on its lowest lens opening. I focused on the tree in the foreground. Then I focused on the foreground track. Then I focused on the face of the Kingfield station till that was in focus. And then I focused on the Peerless sign, the Peerless Tanning Company. I dragged those 4 photographs to the stacking program in the computer, and I sit there and wait about 8 to 10 seconds until they blend it together, and I come up with that.
I'll be darned. All right. Well, listen, we're hitting around 2 hours here, so I think we better think about stopping this show. Guys, do you have anything else that you'd like to say either to Lou or about Lou before we kind of close it down tonight? John?
Hey, I'll go first this time.
All right.
He wants to get to bed. I can tell he wants to go to bed.
Absolutely.
No more than you. No more than you.
No, I'm with you. Go ahead.
No, short and sweet. I think Lou just exemplifies all the qualities of, first and foremost, just a nice guy who happens to be a great modeler and a great photographer. He is kind, he's open, he's generous, and I'm just happy to call him a friend.
Thank you, Kip.
Well, I'll take the middle ground and just say that the tribute to him is that Lou is actually a teacher. Back in another life, he had experience in a school system, and it just sort of rubbed off that he can relate to people that are coming into the hobby, as well as very experienced people, open to everybody, and everybody has something to learn from him.
Yeah, I echo that about the teacher. I mean, that's why all his articles are so well written, because he's basically teaching in his articles. And the other thing I just thought of something else and I forgot it now. Oh, I know. And Lou is one of the rare people in this hobby that has actually made it his occupation. You know, he's turned the hobby into an occupation, and they both exist and flourish. A lot of times, if you make your occupation your hobby suffers, but not in the case of Lou. So that's real interesting.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here with us tonight. We really do appreciate it. And you've added so much, I think, to our discussion and really opened our eyes a little bit about who Lou Sassi really is all about. So, Lou, it's getting that time. I shall give you the last word, sir.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Well, I just want to thank you for asking me to share all of this with you and everybody else. And I also want to thank my friends Jim Murphy, John Birchnell, and Kip Grant for their willingness to share their thoughts and support me this evening. And I especially want to thank my wife and say how fortunate I feel to have her in my life. And she supported me and expressed pride in my modeling and my photography work for more than 5 decades. And she's also joined me over the last few years by applying her own artistic talents and making my railroad more outstanding than I ever could have done by myself. And finally, model railroading, as Jim said, has been a rewarding part of my life for decades. Through it, I've been able to meet a lot of folks, many of whom I've become good friends with. And when I first started in the hobby, I was a loner. Meeting people like Dick Elwell, Alan Keller, my friends at MR, and the fellows that joined me here tonight, and so many others, has given me the opportunity to share my interests while at the same time learning from them. I would like to thank the viewers for watching, and I hope it inspires them to continue enjoying and sharing this great hobby with others.
Well, Lou, thank you so very much. It's really been my honor and pleasure to be here with you tonight and your friends. It's obvious to me that you've made and are still making today just outstanding contributions, both to model railroading and model building in our hobby. But obviously you have some great friends. And I think that's really important, and a major plus for being in the hobby of model railroading is the friends that you make along the way. So thank you again so much for being here tonight. I really do appreciate it. And I also want to say thank you to our viewers on YouTube. You asked some very good questions, I thought. I hope we got the answers that you were looking for. I hope that you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling, so that you'll not miss any of our future shows with other outstanding modelers who have also made model railroading a major part of their lifestyles. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe to our website, newtracksmodeling.com. That way you'll get invited to attend all of our Wednesday evening shows each week, where we try to have people mentor you in the various skills, techniques of model railroading, as well as help improve your confidence that you too can be an outstanding model railroader. So until next time, thank you so much for being here this evening. And Lou, again, thanks so much. You were fantastic.